Thanks, my name is Patrick. I'm going to go through a very quick storytelling adventure here. This is some research I'm currently involved in. I'm about to defend my doctoral thesis in November, hopefully, if all goes well with my external panel. And what I'm presenting is a very small piece of why we should go and hack the bad guys. And I'm going to be very careful here. I'm going to make two statements. I want very clear that I'm not advocating that we do this under our current framework. It's illegal. There's some serious morals and ethical issues that we need to deal with first before we move forward. And the second thing I'm going to say is that the samples I worked with are from the law enforcement, military, and the public safety community and corporations. This was a mandate that was given to me, which I fully embraced 100%, plus 10%, because it's such a cool, interesting concept. And by the way, it's not new. There's some long history in here. All right, so let's go through the story a bit. How did this all start? Well, believe it or not, this ship here is a pirate ship that was commandeered by the government to carry out naval policy. History note. This is not so old. In fact, this is part of our Gulf War history, where again, a military corporation is brought on board to carry out government policy. Here are the two sentences: private and government policy, and the extension of the government and state. This is through industry consultation. The questions that I researched, the problems I looked at, were directed by industry. I had feedback to them going, is this where we really want to go? Is this what we want to do? Yes, and I'll show you why in a minute. Are we talking about strikebacks and revenge? I'll tell you later on. They are two different problems. They have two different functionalities within cybersecurity. There's some history lessons to be learned here. And finally, there were some very specific issues to be addressed. And one of the things I want to note is that the active defense policy has showed up in Canadian policy documents and Canadian public discourse, which is, I'll show you in a second. So from a social sciences point of view, if someone gives me a laptop and one of these clicker things, I can break them pretty quickly. So for me, technology has always been a fascinating toy. But there's a whole bigger issue here around this notion of are we safer or more secure? And I use these terms carefully because this is what industry was asking for. When we talk about safety and security, are we talking about us as humans? Or are we talking about us as being online? Is it an extension of us being online? If we are online, does that change how we perceive the concepts called safety and concepts called security? And what's safety and what's security? Again, come from a corporate background, intelligence background. I always love this question when I say to staff, can you ever be safe? And of course, can you ever be secure? And then finally, can you ever be safe and secure? These are trade-offs. And these are trade-offs that happen all the time. And they're trade-offs that we do in our real world because we can measure that behavior. Can we translate that into cybersecurity? And the answer may be a tentative yes. The judges are still out on it, but be careful of that concept. So how does this work? This is not my slide deck. This is not the updated one. This is not there's one missing here. Don't, it's okay. I can address it through a different way. All right, leave it, yeah, we'll leave it there. So there was a slide in between which actually shows the Nielsen study from 2017 just released last year. And the very last page in the very last paragraph of the Nielsen study is this sentence, we should be more progressive and more active. And this is Canadians, cybersecurity professionals, talking about being more aggressive and being more active defense-wise. The problem was, and this is what I was stuck with, was what did they mean by that? And that's a very serious statement to make, considering that it's a shift from 5 years ago where you couldn't publicly talk about active defense and cyber deterrence unless someone looked at you going, do you really want to do that? And the answer is yes. But we're doing it already. The bad guys are doing this. This is a malware for service design. This is what the bad guys are putting online so that we can go do this for dirt cheap. A couple $1,000 US, I can go do a DDoS attack, a malware attack, or malware design, and it's available. We all know this one, the LoTSAT cannon. It's the idea that we can just DDoS a whole bunch of places and do it for dirt cheap, free. You know, some bandwidth cost, free, because it is free. And you don't need a lot of skill sets to do this. But you can do a lot of damage with this. And then, of course, our favorite toy, Kali Linux. Now, I'm not saying anything bad about Kali Linux. I know the guys who built this stuff. I know the guys who work with it. I love them dearly. It's the same tools that the bad guys use. You can reconfigure this thing to do other nasty things on a more sustained basis. The point being is that it's not about the technology, it's about the people. And from a social sciences point of view, I step back and keep coming back to this question, where are the people and the conversation about people in cyber deterrence? What do we do with those people, our citizens, our consumers? And we'll show you some examples in a minute. Okay, revenge. One of the fascinating things I learned during this research was this idea between revenge, retaliation, and retribution. According to some psychology people, not me, these are 3 different problems. And they have 3 different functionalities in terms of how we think about wanting to hurt somebody. And we want to project that force, that aggression, that lethal force decision. It depends on which one these are engaged in. So this gentleman here, Mr. Beach, he's a great comedian. He's also a bit of a self-made hacker. Mr. Beach sits down. He shows how he engages the bad guys, his words, and basically destroys or denies the bad guy's ability to keep functioning. That is a form of active defense. He's not law enforcement. He's not the military. He's a citizen and a consumer. This is Artists Against 419. This was a group of people who, to this day, remain anonymous to a certain level. They used bandwidth hogging software and took down all of the fake bank accounts, and by what they do, by stealing the bandwidth and hot linking the accounts, it effectively destroys this fake bank's ability to continue projecting fake accounts. And as a result, these things start shutting down. This is the first time, though, we start to think about the idea that active defense has unintended consequences because they stole all of the bandwidth. So now there's innocent people sitting on the same bandwidth who are now affected by this problem. They lost their service also. This was the more interesting one, though. This is a survey completed. It's conducted every year, and it's by two cybersecurity researchers out of Chicago, I believe. And what it is, it's called the Cyber Index. This little cyber index is indicating over since 2013, the threats around cybersecurity and the ability to manage and respond to them is getting worse and worse and worse. And I'm not going to talk further about it because you guys all know this. What was interesting was this subset survey was, do you hack back? 8% of the respondents who are Fortune 500 companies, yes, we do. The sub-question was, did it feel good? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Okay. And they could probably say it multiple times. You sort of get the gist. This is that good feeling that we get of going, no longer are we victims. There's a danger there, though, because if we're not victims and we want to do something about it, we start to get into some other kinds of modality. Okay, a history note. So this gentleman here, Win Schwartau, who is a fairly advocate, vocal about active defense. His paper in 1999 was really simple. There's an editorial comment. Let's just go beat up the bad guys. And that was his inch column, beat up the bad guys. He didn't last very long in the career track he chose at that time, and now he's considered one of the best consultants in the business. But he was advocating we do something about this. This is in 1999. Now, this is when I thought this thing was started, but there's some more data. We know Anonymous. They actually organized themselves in a way to conduct their own kinds of hack-back operations. Yes, they're bad or good. Depends what side of the fence you sit on. Has a corporate citizen, or has a consumer, or has a citizen. So depending where you sit as a victim determines how you see active defense. Reiteration of this again, this idea of putting up the cannon, going out and beating up some places and taking them offline. This was a new advancement. This is the mass model. This is a malware by design model. So you can now have sites inside Tor that actually allow you to build customized malware. Dirt cheap. It's customized botnets. We're seeing customized botnets also. This is where the change happens in 2016. Not that long ago, where the US government never ever talked about active defense as a policy position until this position paper came out. Now, interestingly, the consultation of this position paper is called Into the Gray Zone, and part of that process was very straightforward. The Senate Arms Committee engaged guys who were lawyers, to help them direct a conversation around should we engage active defense as a policy position for the private sector. And this is the time where the US government shifts the policy position and starts doing something about it. About the same time, this bill emerges, HR 4036. I'll get into more details, but this is a bill that creates a legal remedy for active defense. It's a legal remedy. Now, there's some debate about the bill, and I'll show you in a minute what the debate looks like. All right, this is what I call the failed policy problem. We failed to take care of our humans. Out of the state of Georgia, we know the election system was hacked down there. We understand that was done through some ethical hacking. It was legitimate. They reported it to the agencies. They reported it to the electoral, where's that? Electoral people. The FBI investigates them. And the allegations from the FBI was, did they have the right to do this? In part, they did. They were ethical about it, and they reported out. What the concern was that they also released the vulnerability. So now the public has access to the vulnerability for this election system, which is used in most of the states and part of Canada. And this is a concern. All right, so how's the response? So the response was to modify the legislation slightly to give the legal remedy without defining the full scope of the active defense's options open to them. In other words, they weren't told what tools to use to strike back and cause some kind of projected harm. Now, I'm not the lawyer. I'm not going to provide any legal comment on this, other than that the key point to take away here was there was this lack of public process. This bill appears to come out of nowhere. The response, though, is quite well organized, and you'll recognize two logos. Number one, we know who this is. Number two, we know who this is. Okay, they write a letter, and it's a very intriguing letter. If you ever want to take a look at semantics about how corporations defend themselves from this problem, it's a bad idea. That's the gist. What was not said was that there was about $600 million apparently, and the numbers are still in flux, that was going to be invested by Georgia to put up 2 cyber centers for these 2 organizations. The threat was, we'll take the money away from you and your jobs, and we'll have no more problems. So as a result, we were a bit worried about how this was corporations directly influencing a public policy with no debate. The governor, smart man, vetoed it right away. And it was a smart call, all right? The lack of public consultation, the consequences to the economy, protecting a career, these are all human traits. Had nothing to do with cybersecurity. It was human traits. And we're left with a vague spot. Now what? All right, 4036. Why was it doomed? Chartraud was predicting this a long time ago. Any legislation that comes forward will be doomed because there's this lack of understanding about society's position on active defense. When the bill came forward to Congress and under a new kind of legislation, the wording was almost identical still. So nobody learned from Georgia, but the US Senate went forward with it anyways, the US House of Representatives. This is the guy who sponsors it, and he's putting his career on the line. He continues to back this bill up. We'll see where it goes and what happens to his career. This is the prognosis from the security industry, a 12% chance of succeeding. Not a good chance. Should it succeed? Well, I don't know. If it fails, we're still back to the same problem. If it does succeed, we've opened up a whole Pandora's box of creating active defense cyber deterrence options that we don't know how to debate correctly. All right, so again, we're back to this policy problem. All right, where does this come from? Well, my research then went into another position going, well, wait a minute here. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. Let's have an actual, open, transparent conversation about figuring out where active defense really came from. It doesn't come from cybersecurity, it comes from botanical sciences. And it's a very solid science background. And it has specific segments involved in the blue column there, the specific stages of active defense that are being proposed. In the middle is this biological framework. This stuff's been tested over and over again. You'll note the last piece is not to leave people dying and stranded. The plant survives. Same thing with the military. This is a US doctrine. It's traced to a very specific doctrinal position around the 1980s when NATO began to realize that if the Russians did come over the border, it would be one heck of a fight, and there's what they call an active defense position within the US NATO, or within the US policy space. And it was designed around a very simple concept I'm ex-forces. I was an armored tank driver, and I understand these terminologies very well. I'm going, yeah, I get this. I was over there at the time they rolled this thing out. It was going to be scary as all get up. But the point being was that at the very end, shift to offensive. It was a different position to take. Now, for guys who are talking active defense today in cybersecurity and CISOs and places like that, there's a question raised, are we here as victims to defend ourselves? At what point do we switch over to being offensive? And in the cyber literature, cyber deterrence literature, and the cyber deterrence debates I had with people, nobody seems to know where that X line is. So we're going to open up a can of worms about talking about active defense as a victim. When do we stop being active defense? When do we become offensive? And there's some spaces that could draw upon. So things like lethal force continuum models, the judicial framework around the Supreme Court of Canada, the individual to defend themselves. I get hit with a baseball bat. I can't use a shotgun to blow you up. I've got to use there's a reasonable force in there. Can that be applied to cyber deterrence? And the answer is yes. There is ways to do this. And part of the way is actually to step back a bit and ask the human question first. All of the active defense debates are around technology. There's very few papers that I could find, and when I talk to the authors and get some information about it, there's very few papers that talked about the societal framing of active defense. There's very little papers that talk about the human emotive behaviors, the human emotive responses to saying, hey, you're a victim now, you want to go beat the bad guy up. Oh, hell yeah, just give me the tools. Well, hold on here now. Do you understand what those tools are going to do? No, and I don't care. I just want to make these guys suffer. Yes, that's human nature. And when you're a victim that's been repeatedly victimized, and the stats can data is kind of intriguing because I want to go look at some numbers in there now. The problem, though, is there's only two frameworks that actually survives the data test. And the first one was, we all know this is social contract theory, this idea that we have an obligation, government takes care of us. We've assigned a lot of our government responsibilities and a slippery slope to corporations. Our privacy, the privacy debate is assigned to corporations. We govern it, but they manage it. So there's a slippery slope that we're going down very carefully here. Are we okay for time? Wait. The other part is this notion of justice. In cyber deterrence, active deterrence, justice is kind of a problem because nobody really knows what it means to have justice online. Some people argue, let's just burn down the servers. I had one guy tell me, yeah, he took his team, put them on a plane, flew to Germany, and knocked on the guy's door in Germany. You didn't tell the Bundeswehr police you were coming, were you? Oh, no. And you probably left that night on the next flight out called the red eye. Oh, yes. And did you achieve your objective? Mm-hmm. How do you know? How do you know it's not a whack-a-mole effect? How do you know this guy just didn't shut down shop, go burn up another server somewhere else in another Berlin shop somewhere? That Berlin shop runs lots and lots and lots of spamwares. Really? So he could just relocate it time and time and time again. So was justice achieved? And then the funny question back to me goes, well, what would you do? I really don't know. But I'm asking you, as the victim, did you feel it was justified? And of course, I'm not going to use his language. There was lots of colored tones in there, and it went on for a couple minutes. And when he finally breathed, I went, okay, got it. Would you do it again? And the answer was yes. Knowing full well that he didn't know if he actually achieved what he wanted to do. He said he would absolutely do it again. And this was consistent with the other participants I talked to. The key point of the research was this, though, is that we could do an active defense strategy. It's a yes-no decision. That binary concept amongst my survey participants was a yes-no decision. But I asked them what happens to maybe, not an option. And they said no maybes because if we were in the maybe space, then we're still victims. So we have to get rid of that space somehow. That's them talking, not me, all right? So the data was kind of neat to work through, very fascinating. What came out was this kind of model at the very end was that all of the participants were emphatic that if they could do it, they didn't want to report it to government. They wanted to report it to a body of people they could trust to handle the data, to learn lessons from it. So how that impacts upon our future policies and strategies is intriguing. And then finally, a public reporting piece. This I did not expect. I asked the participants, the question was, if you did conduct active defense, would you want it reported to the public? And I had, on a scale of 1 to 10, would you strongly agree, strongly disagree type of statement. And I was shocked, they all agreed. What I didn't ask deliberately was, what did you want reported out? I just wanted to get to the stage, could I actually find out these guys would cooperate with the reporting out process? And then surprisingly, yes, they do. And the reason being is they want to be able to send a deterrence messaging. So if you look at some of the deterrence research and some of the ideas of how we project force and project threats, then we have this idea that we can tell the bad guys through this mechanism, hey, we know where you are, we can do something about it. I worked for law enforcement and did some violence in the workplace studies, and we told people how bad they were. They still continue being bad. I'm not so sure if that's the right way, but that's what those participants were telling me. Finally, this messy chart here, straightforward, really, believe it or not. The two right-hand yellow spots is a corporation. There's the guy who started the research. What came out was the problem wasn't about the corporations. It's about individuals. It's about how people make decisions about active defense. And as a result, you see most of the arrows point towards this individual as a decision maker. They have to have the power and authority to make decisions about active defense, hacking back, striking back at the bad guys. Again, this motivational framework. This is where technology meets the human. So up until this point, I did not deal with any of the technological frameworks. At this point, I was stuck with a problem was, what do we do when technology is used to conduct active defense? So I borrowed from some research called technology adaptation models, where people have done previous studies on how people use technology, perceive the use of technology, and the way it's used. And what I learned was kind of interesting was these two factors are going to have a huge role in understanding how someone uses Kali Linux for good, switches their framework up, and use it as a, and I'm going to call it what it is, a weapon to go out and do harm. This is a big cognitive jump from being in a position of being defenseless. It's a cognitive load and a cognitive jump as a person to go on the offense. It's not easy to go hurt someone. Even in the cyberspace world, we're going to be talking about people's lives. And this is the piece I think was missed from the research. And finally, the decision point, yes, no. What was interesting from the data was this, again, this comment, yes, it's no. Even if it's no, we still need to record why it was no. Just saying no doesn't absolve you from telling us why it's not, why you didn't do it. We may learn more about this decision concepts and frameworks around it. All right, so what's left in the mess? Well, very straightforward. We couldn't resolve this problem, the ethics and legalities of these systems, because we really don't know what they are yet. We know we claim it's ethically immoral to go beat the bad guys up. Hold on here. It was ethically immoral to have vigilante mobs and death penalties, but we moved in that direction. It was ethically immoral to have atrocities of war, but we dealt with it. So as normative language emerges as we struggle with these ethical debates, which is not occurring in active defense. There's just this blind assumption for whatever reason, it's just a bad thing to do. One of my colleagues, he puts out, from the 1980s when this first came out, the words was really bad, really bad, really bad. And that's been the discourse around active defense, really bad, really bad. And now apparently it's really bleeping bad, okay? He hasn't explained that yet. This is from a U.S. indictment that was opened up, unlocked. This is that little dam in New York that had 2 feet of water in it. This is the Republican guards from Iran. Thank you. 1 minute. Okay, great. This is what they were supposed to hit. That's got 200 feet of water and a flood chain about 20, 30 clicks long, apparently. Not good. All right. Wrong name. Similar names, wrong addresses. This was the other one that I'm fascinated with from healthcare. I worked in this when this malware hit the national healthcare systems. I was fascinated by some of the pictures. All the ambulances parked out front because they couldn't get in the trauma bays. When you park an ambulance out front in the trauma bay, you've got mortality and morbidity rates. I want to know what this thing caused. Finally, we all know who this is. This is the Stuxnet story. Interesting, the Stuxnet, this is the state-based one. Quite effective, apparently. And then the final one is 30 seconds remaining. And this is the last one. This is a guy who has Kali Linux, who went to Nigeria, tore down a network, and had fun doing it. And that's where we're at today. Done. Thank you.